Everybody's ready? Back on the record. This is the state versus Christopher Hess. We're outside the presence of the jurors. After the lunch break, Ms. Madison wanted to put some stuff on the record. Ms. Madison, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. This is more to address things so that we don't have to send the jury back in and out. I do believe that the state has opened the door to the grand jury clearing Officer Kempell of criminal responsibility. Specifically, the DA asked him about whether or not he had been disciplined within the Dallas Police Department, and the language he used to ask the question that it was about deadly force. He has now raised the issue of administrative discipline and criminal action, and has left it unclear as to whether or not it has been deemed under the law as to whether or not Officer Kempell has been cleared of criminal responsibility. Therefore, they have created a false impression, and that door is now open. Additionally, it is now also, they have impeached him with this information, and once they impeach him with this information, I believe it becomes important to show that they are still sponsoring his testimony and routing his testimony on other cases. That they are offering and sponsoring his testimony and impeaching him out of the other side of their mouth.
Mr. Lewis, any reply?
Yes, Your Honor, we would still object to that information with regard to him not being indicted for the charge. Obviously, criminal and administrative are separate. With regard to the state continuing to route him for trial, that's not relevant. And that may be in fact the case. He's been placed on our Brady list, and certain disclosures have to be made because he has been sustained for certain violations of departmental policy. And that's per the DA's office policy. So we would still object to that coming out.
You say he's on the Brady list?
Yes.
Okay.
Your Honor, I would submit to the court that there are two different lists. There's the Brady list and the do not sponsor their testimony list. The do not sponsor their testimony list is when they believe that an officer's actions are so against what the DA's office holds dear that they cannot sponsor this witness and their credibility. The Brady list is for any sustained allegations that were made by the internal affairs, and they give notice of what the allegations are, and then they let the court decide what that officer should be questioned about. Those are two different lists. One determination is made by the DA's office, and they have not made that determination, and that's why it's significant that they are still routing and sponsoring his testimony. I would submit to the court that with the DA's argument that that's administrative, neither of those things had been broached in any way, and it was not relevant until the DA's office and specifically Mr. Lewis opened the door with his questions.
I'm not going to let you get into this charge or not charge, indictment or no indictment. I will let you get into that the officer is still, his testimony is still sponsored by the DA's office in certain regards. And I do think that's fair, so I'll let you do that. Is there anything else we need to take up outside the presence of the jury before we call the officer?
Yes, Your Honor. So that I'm clear on your ruling, am I allowed to let the jury know that he's not facing current criminal charges?
Is there anything else?
Yes. I need to know from the DA's office if Virgilio Rosales has been granted immunity in anything. He has testified to the grand jury. I need to know if he's ever been granted immunity or if they intend to grant him immunity and what they will grant him immunity for.
He's granted immunity for his statements that were made in the grand jury, and that was made clear in the grand jury transcript that was provided to defense and discovery.
But was there any document that was signed for that? I've not been given any immunity documents.
Is there an immunity document?
I believe so, Judge.
Are you gonna, do we need to do this now? I mean, is this something that you can look into, or have your people look into while we're testifying in front of the jury?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you mind doing that?
Yes, sir.
Will that be all right?
Yes, John.
Do you need it for Kempell's testimony?
I don't need it for Kempell. I will need it for this afternoon, and you've asked me to not have them take multiple breaks, so I was trying to do it at this time.
Why don't you get your people on it, if there is one. Do you know whether there is a signed, what you're asking for specifically is a signed immunity agreement? Is that right?
Anything that has to do with what immunity was granted, the scope of the immunity, what was promised.
Y'all look into it.
And lastly, I would like to revisit your rulings on allowing Melissa Burke to testify. However, I do think a lot of that will have to do on whether or not the DA's office has Brady they didn't turn over regarding immunity for this witness.
For which one?
Rosales, whether or not they've not turned over immunity documentation on Rosales.
Okay. We're not doing that right now.
Yes,
Call
sir.
the jury, and if you wouldn't mind having Mr. Rogers grab your final statement. Go ahead, Sheriff.
All rise.
Thank you, Sheriff. Y'all need to be seated. Sir, I'll remind you, you're still under the oath I gave to you. Please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lewis, I believe this is your witness. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, So, Officer Kempell, we were discussing that you had fired one shot prior to the break and that you stopped firing because the defendant was in front of you, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, was that because did he move in front of you, or was he in front of you in the first place and you just realized it later?
I don't remember. I just remember after I fired to seeing his back patch on his uniform.
All right. And then you stated after you fired that you moved to a position of cover behind, I guess, one of the vehicles that were parked under the carport?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're going to take a look at your body cam, which is states exhibit number 3. And this is going to be just prior to the shots when you move over, okay?
Okay.
Watch out. Have you ever like secured their uniform and armed? Don't move!
So you fired right there, correct?
Yes, sir.
For the record, at 3:37. And we're going to watch where the defendant is, and then we're going to watch where you aim your attention. So at this point, your firearm is still trained on the vehicle, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at this point, it does not appear as though the defendant is in your line of fire.
No, sir, not at that time.
So what
Excuse
time
me.
were you talking about that he was in front of you and you couldn't fire anymore?
When I did fire, after I fired, I noticed that he was in a position that was not safe for me to fire at that point. And then I moved over behind that truck and tried to reassess the situation. By the time that happened, that vehicle had stopped for the final time.
Okay. And you say that after that you moved to a position of cover, correct?
Yes, sir.
Armed. Don't move!
Let me ask you this, the second volley of shots where the vehicle pauses and the code goes again, did you feel as though that Officer Hopkins was still over there at that point?
I do not recall. I do not recall at that point. Like I said, I was trying to reassess the situation after I'd moved behind I believe it's a pickup truck right there.
I'm going to show you defendant's exhibit number 11. step around really quick before we...
Yes, sir.
Show us again where you believe that Officer Hopkins was at the time that you decided to do it.
Somewhere in this area here.
Underneath the carport? Because here's...
Is this checker behind the carport?
Yes, sir.
Like anywhere over here.
Okay, so behind the line for the carport or in front of it?
It'd be behind the line. Like somewhere right there.
Okay, so
That was the last place I'd seen him.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm sorry.
But as far as if he was behind the line for the carport, I mean, the car couldn't come back that far, correct?
It could have. I mean, the only thing that's holding this carport up is a post that's like somewhere back here, I believe.
Okay, but just for the record, he's behind the line for the carport. That's where you last saw him, correct?
Last time I saw him was probably right around at the line of the carport.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a seat, thanks? You talked about how you guys are trained that deadly force is basically your last resort,
Yes, sir.
right? And as far as using your firearm while you're on duty, you guys are also trained to be extremely careful as it pertains to your target in your back. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean to you?
Before you fire, you should always be aware of what's beyond your target. In the event that you miss, that if the bullet was to continue traveling, it didn't injure anybody.
Does that also include, say in this instance, with the moving motor vehicle, that you would, it'd be prudent to look maybe behind the vehicle, in front of the vehicle, to determine whether or not there's any other officers or any other individuals at that point?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as perceiving a threat, aren't you also taught to scan the scene just in case there are other threats present?
Yes.
Okay, so that means just not focusing on one thing, but maybe looking around, scanning, not even necessarily turning your head, but using your peripheral vision to see and scan the scene.
Yes, but in an ideal situation, that is correct. But when you're in a situation where there's things developing rapidly and you get tunnel vision on the certain object and thing, sometimes it's hard to get out of that and scan the area like you're referring to.
But in this situation, I think you testified before that you had moved out of the path of the vehicle well before deadly force was used. I mean, let me ask you this, were you in fear that the vehicle was going to strike you when you shot?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you aware that there was a firearm found in the gun after the shooting?
Are you?
I'm sorry. Well, let me just ask you, were you aware of any guns inside the vehicle prior to you shooting?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you see anybody inside the vehicle pulling a gun and firing at you guys?
No, sir.
Okay. Did any kind of gun play into your decision to use deadly force?
No, sir.
You're stating that you used deadly force because you feared as though the vehicle was going to fire, was going to injure Officer Hopkins.
Yes, sir.
Is that the only reason that you fired?
Yes, sir.
And so you stated that you were disciplined for this DPD?
Yes, sir.
Police Department. What punishment did you receive for that?
I was suspended
Okay. For how long?
30 days.
Pass switch.
May we approach him?
Sure.
State has no further questions, or defense has no further questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor.
Very good. Sir, you may stand down. I need you to stay around the courtroom, though. Courthouse. Call your next witness, please.
The defense calls Courtney Ferreria.
Good afternoon. If you would please come to the front of the courtroom. Before you have a seat, raise your right hand. Swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
I do.
Please have a seat. You responded to questions from Ms. Madison first. Whose witness will this be for the state?
Mr.
Perhaps
Lewis.
Mr. Lewis, who's directly in front of you. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, will you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Courtney Ferreira, Ferreira.
And how are you employed?
I am employed as a forensic biologist at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, also known as SWIFTS or the Dallas County Crime Lab.
And this jury would have already met two of your coworkers, the medical examiner on the case, and they've heard a little bit about IFL numbers. Can you remind them what an IFS number is?
Yes,
You got it
it-
wrong last time too.
An IFS, it stands for the Institute of Forensic Sciences. So anytime a case comes into our building, it's given a unique identifying number, which is the IFS number. And that unique identifying number follows the case from its entire time.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's previously been admitted for record purposes, defense exhibits 28 and 29. 28 would be a serology report and 29 a DNA. Give me a moment to compare the
Yes.
IFS.
Yes, they are copies of the serology report and of the DNA report.
And would these aid you in your testimony to the jury here today?
Yes.
Defense would offer defense exhibit 28, as previously indicated that the state would stipulate, and defense exhibit 29.
May I first witness brief, Your Honor?
You may.
So it appears the first 9 pages of this packet are your report, is that correct?
Yes.
It also has some additional materials attached on the back here,
Yes.
laboratory statements.
Yes.
Is this something that you drafted or created?
This was created by the Institute.
Okay, but is this something that you personally drafted?
I did not personally draft this, no.
Okay. No objection to the actual part of the report that you made, Your Honor? And I would object to the last report on back here.
I'll amend my offering, Your Honor.
Okay.
May I have a document with the witness?
Sure.
No objection to defendant's 28.
Say your name for me again.
Ferreira.
Ms. Ferreira. Basically, what we're talking about is in Defense Exhibit 29, you have a report attached on the back that is from your agency talking about this, or a letter talking about this report, correct?
It was talking about our process in general, one specific aspect of our testing.
And this would have been the way you guys submit it to everybody as on the
Yes, it was as an attachment. It was listed at the very last page of the report. It says that there's an attachment, and it was just simply an attachment to any reports that were going out for a time period.
And at this time, we will offer 29 for all purposes, and then Defense Exhibit 39 just for record purposes for the integrity of the report.
objection.
States 29 is admitted for all, I'm sorry, defendants 29 is admitted for all purposes and 39 for record purposes only. You may publish.
Serology, tell the jury what serology is.
Serology is the initial when a case comes in is being requested. It first would go through serology. Serology is the screening of biological fluids. They take and they screen for seminal fluid, for blood. They also take samples for handlers, so who might have touched an object, and then for who may have worn an object.
Okay. And they do a presumptive and a confirmatory test, correct?
Yes, in tests such as if they're testing for blood, they do a presumptive test that will tell you if you potentially have the presence of human blood. And if something tests presumptively positive, they then can make the decision if there's a sufficient amount of sample to then make a confirmatory test. And that confirmatory test for blood specifically would let you know if it was specific to human blood.
Because if it lights up, it could be other things, and it could be a possum blood or something like that, correct?
The presumptive test also tests presumptively positive, I believe, for rust, and there's other things, yes. The confirmatory test, I also believe, as in addition to human blood, I believe ferret blood might test positive for this test.
And then you said to the jury, if there's enough biological material, they will do the confirmatory. Why, if there's not enough biological material, they do not?
If after there's presumptive testing, they don't feel that there's enough sample, they are going to preserve that sample so there's sufficient amount of sample to move forward to DNA analysis.
Basically, if they use what's left for serology, they can't reuse that for DNA.
That's correct.
And you will see where I put on the document cam, will that match the first page of your report of what all was tested?
Yes.
And if you'll go through those, I'm going to use an exhibit that we have here. Basically what we're doing is we've had the physical evidence detective testify to where these samples came from. So I'm going to use this and then have you talk about the results of what was found on these various items, okay?
Okay.
Looking at 16G, this is going to be the gun that was from the suspect vehicle, the stolen vehicle.
Okay, that was presumptive test for blood was positive, and then positive test was also confirmed, so it was confirmed to be positive for human blood.
And then we have 16H, the trigger, that the PES detective stated he took a swab and swabbed the trigger. What do we have here?
That was presumptively positive for blood, and as I stated before, if they feel like there's not sufficient quantity, they will not move forward, so this was stopped after the presumptive testing.
If you look in, you have serology's notes.
That's
and
correct.
if you look under T3, did the serologist use a swab and make attempts to get what is known as a swab for handler DNA?
That was on a different item. The swabs that were submitted, that swab 16H, would not have been, that would have been a swab that the agency would have submitted, and we would not have done anything with that swab other than presumptively test it.
You are right. I'm trying to be clear on my questions, but when you're talking about the trigger, if you look at serology's notes, serology also tried to take handler DNA swab where one of the areas swabbed was the trigger, correct?
There were samples from the serologists that were taken in attempt to get handler DNA.
And the reason why you were correcting me is because you take, the crime scene analyst would take a Q-tip, and that's one swab, and you're never going to mix it with a different swab, correct?
The item then, so the swabs that were submitted were swabs taken from the agency or the crime scene. Then the actual item would be submitted, and our serologists would take their own swabs of that item, and so they would not use that same swab, yes.
Okay, so we have a swab from the physical evidence person and then a swab from the serologist in this general area.
That's correct.
It will later be submitted for DNA. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay?
Okay.
Going to 16I. 16I is going to be a swab taken by the PES detective of the slide of the gun which would be the top part. Do you know anything about guns?
Minimally, not tons, but yes, the slide is the top part.
The slide would be the thing that somebody typically pulls back in order to chamber around.
I believe so.
Okay, what
That,
was there?
those were the same results, that it was presumptively positive for blood, and then there was insufficient sample to move forward.
So they saved it for DNA.
Correct.
16J would be a swab of the magazine.
That was the same result. It was presumptively positive for blood, and then it was insufficient to move forward further, and they maintained it for DNA.
And then it's not on here, but there was a holster submitted that was found in the passenger floorboard. Was that tested to see if it possibly had blood on it?
Yes, that sample was presumptively tested, and it was negative. And a sample was maintained if wanting for DNA analysis in the future.
Okay, so it was swabbed as well to look for DNA.
Yes.
Who was it swabbed by to look for DNA?
The serologist took that swabbing, Michelle Sharp.
And then the firearm in its totality, it was basically scanned all over to see if it had biological material in it, correct?
Yes, the entire item was screened.
And this jury had seen pictures of the gun that was found in the car. It confirmed positive to have human blood on it, correct?
That is correct.
The magazine,
The magazine was presumptively positive for blood, and then there was insufficient sample to confirm that.
then the cartridge, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cartridges found in the magazine. What were the results on those? Basically, they all had the same result.
Yes, they were all presumptively positive for blood, and again, the same, they were insufficient to move forward.
Let's move on to DNA at this time, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is specifically where your area of expertise is, correct?
That's correct.
What is DNA?
Very simply, we all know DNA is what makes us who we are. 99.9% of all of our DNA is the same. We all have 2 arms, 2 legs, nose. We get half of our DNA from our mothers, half of our DNA from our fathers. What we're looking at is the 0.1% of DNA that differs among each one of us. Very simply, what we're doing is DNA sits in the cells. We want to get the DNA out of the cells. We get it out of the cells, we clean it up and get rid of much of the debris and junk, and then we put it onto an instrument that tells us about how much DNA we have. Once we do that, we put it onto another instrument that you can kind of think of like a Xerox machine. So it makes multiple copies of the DNA. And once we do that, we put it onto another instrument that then gives us the DNA profile. And what we're attempting to do is to see if any items of evidence we're able to obtain DNA profiles. We then use that profile to make any comparisons to known individuals to see if we can include them as being potential contributors to the DNA profile or if we can exclude them. If we make an inclusion of an individual to an item of evidence, we then want to see how significant of an inclusion that is. So we then would give a statistical weight to give the weight of what that inclusion would be.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
I want you to explain that a little bit better, but we'll come back to it once we talk about actual numbers, okay?
Okay.
Fair to say that there is handler DNA and blood.
Yes.
My blood is going to have my handler DNA, correct?
Yes, you can't look at a DNA profile and typically know if it's from, if somebody touched something, if somebody, bled on something. There's much more DNA in blood. So if there's a blood stain, you're going to most likely get a DNA profile from that blood. Touching, let's say, the door handle. Obviously, people touch that door handle. I may or may not get a good DNA profile because you're then depending on the sloughing off of skin cells, and somebody may not shed a ton of skin cells. So you may not get as good of a DNA profile.
But you will get, okay, so your blood's going to have a lot of your DNA because it's biological matter, and if your blood's left somewhere, you're going to have a lot of DNA.
Yes.
Correct? But with handler DNA, it's going to be there's a lot of contributing factors, right?
That's correct.
You gave the example of if somebody's a slougher or not, right?
Yes.
So I can touch this water bottle But it's gonna depend on a number of different factors, right?
That's correct.
Do I shed a lot of skin cells? Am I a sweater? How nervous am I when I hold it? How often do I hold it? How many times do I touch it, correct?
That's correct.
And everybody's different.
Right.
But those are the two different types of DNA that you're talking about.
In this particular case, yes.
Will you turn to page 4? Basically, this is just going to be your table of all of your results.
That's correct.
Let's just start with the first one. It's going to be 16G, and we'll go in that order. 16G is going to be the swab taken by the police department of the grips of the gun found in the vehicle.
The DNA profile obtained from that was a mixture of 2 individuals, and it could be determined to be a major contribution and a minor contribution. So what that means is that when we're looking at the DNA profiles, one, I'm able to tell it's a mixture because I said before, you get half of your DNA from your mom, half of your DNA from your father. So at any one area we're looking at, one person could have 2 genetic markers. If at these areas that we're looking at, we see 4, 5, or multiple genetic markers, that lets us know that there's a mixture. So more than one person contributed to the DNA profile. Once we're determined it's a mixture, there's times that we can tell that one person contributed more of that DNA profile. And when that's the case, we call that person the major contributor, and then anything else would be part of the minor contribution. So in this case,
Hold on. I should have talked a little bit more about this. In the table, you can see in the upper corner, you see Genevive Dawes and Virgilio Rosales. Tell the jury what is a standard.
What I was talking about before, how we are trying to obtain profiles and then we compare them to known individuals. The known individuals, the way we typically get standards are either a blood, so we get a blood sample from an individual, or we get a buccal swab. What a buccal swab is very simply, it's a Q-tip, and we swab the inside of cheek cells, and we then are able to obtain the DNA profile of that individual and use it for comparison purposes.
So basically, known samples were taken from Genevive Dawes by your coworker, Dr. Gwen.
Yes.
And you were submitted known samples from Virgilio Rosales.
Yes.
And you took those and did the very thing you spoke about. You took the DNA and you made lots of copies.
Yes, obtain a DNA profile, yes.
And then you take those 2 known samples, and then you take all of the swabs and the evidence submitted to you, and you run it and see if there's matches.
We obtain the DNA profiles from all the evidence items, and then we make the comparisons to the known individuals, yes.
Okay. Do you ever come up with unknown?
Yes.
We see it as unknown male, unknown female. It would be listed in the report in that manner, correct?
Yes, it would say male 1, female 1, male 2, or however many unknown individuals we obtain.
It's just unknown DNA, and perhaps you can find additional standards and make these matches.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's go back to your very first one, which is the stain swab of 16G, the swab of the grip that was taken by the physical evidence police officer.
Okay, that sample, again, was a mixture of 2. Could be determined to be a major and a minor contribution. The major contributor was from a single female and matched the DNA profile of Genevive Dawes. And Virgilio Rosales was included as being a potential contributor to the minor contribution.
Okay, and you talked a little bit about attaching a statistical weight to it. The match with Genevive Dawes, what was that statistical weight?
The most conservative is less than 1 in 10 trillion. So to put that in much easier terms, there's roughly about 7 billion people in this earth. You would need the population of 1,000 Earths, and you would expect to find that profile 1 time.
Okay, and we see it listed up there, 1 in 10T. If you go down to the bottom, that's where you see the 10T is the trillion.
Yes,
This is small.
that's right.
I've looked at it a lot, but we see 1 in 10T, and you go down here and you see where you link it up, correct?
That's correct.
Basically, there's not enough room on that piece of paper for all the zeros.
That's correct.
And the way you best describe it is if there were so many Earths you would run into this person one more time?
You would expect, in the population of 1,000 Earth, you would expect to find this profile one time.
Let's go with the match to Virgilio Rosales. Was his DNA found on the swab of the grave?
He was included as being a potential contributor to that minor contribution, and the most conservative statistic was 1 in 59,400. So for every 59,400 people, you'd expect to find that profile one time.
Okay. Is that less or more than a nurse?
It's less. I believe Globe Life Theater, the old Ranger Stadium, was roughly about, I think it held like close to 50,000. So you'd roughly expect about one person in that entire stadium.
And can you say whether or not one of those findings is more consistent with handler DNA or blood DNA?
No.
The next one is the stain swab of 16H, which is going to be the swab of the trigger.
Okay, again, that was a mixture, and it could be determined to be a major and a minor. The major contributor was from a single female and matched the profile of Genevive Dawes. With that, it would have that same statistical weight. And Virgilio Rosales was excluded as being a potential contributor to that sample.
What does that mean?
When comparing his profile, in looking at it, there was no way that he would have been included to that sample that was obtained. So he would have been excluded.
So his DNA was not left on that particular part of the weapon?
Yes, he was excluded as being a potential contributor.
You're not saying he's never touched it. To be fair, we talked about handler DNA. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not.
Correct. I can only say simply from that sample, he was excluded.
And I want you to be as matter of fact as possible. I don't want to hint that things happened that they didn't. I just want you to state what you can, tell us conclusively what you can't.
Okay.
Let's move to the next one. Swab 16I. The swab of the slide taken by the police officer at the scene.
That again was a mixture that could be determined to be a major and a minor contributor. And again, it was a profile of the major contributor was from a single female, matched the profile of Genevive Dawes. It would have that same statistical weight of the less than 1 in 10 trillion. And the Virgilio Rosales was included as being a potential contributor to that minor contribution with a statistical weight of 1 in 3,570.
Okay, and what's the statistical weight on that?
So it would be for every 3,570 individuals, one person would also be included.
The next one, that is the swab taken from 16J.
Yes. That,
Hold on just a second. 16J is the swab of the magazine.
that profile was a single source profile, and it was from a single female that matched the DNA profile of Genevive Dawes with that same statistical weight of the less than 1 in 10 trillion.
Okay. And Virgilio Rosales was excluded.
Yes.
The next part, you do 11.5.1, the sample from the holster.
Yes, that sample was a mixture of 2 individuals, and Genevive Dawes was excluded as being a potential contributor to that mixture, and Virgilio Rosales was included as being a potential contributor to that mixture with a statistical weight of 1 in 447. So for every 447 individuals, you would expect one person to be included.
And that would be the holster that was removed from the passenger floorboard by the Dawes. Going on to the next stain, you put 12.1.1 stain from the firearm T1.
Yes, that sample was a mixture of 2 contributors. It could be resolved into a major and a minor contribution. The DNA profile from the major contributor was from a single female and matched the DNA profile of Genevive Dawes with that same statistic of the less than 1 in 10 trillion. And Virgilio Rosales was included as being a potential contributor to that minor contribution with a statistical weight of 1 in 122. So for every 122 individuals, you expect one person to be included.
Going to 12.1.2, the stain T2 from the firearm. We're going to have multiple stains for the firearm. I want you to tell me if you can say where these stains are from. So for the jury's purposes, you're basically looking back for the serologist notes where she removed those swabs, correct?
That's correct.
And she makes pretty intense notes, draws a picture of the gun, draws arrows from exactly where she would have removed those swabs.
That's correct.
And then she puts an exact link on where she swabbed and then submits it saying, this swab came from this part of the gun with a diagram and an arrow showing where.
That's correct.
Okay, to the best of your ability, tell me where. The first stain, T1, where did that come from?
Okay, that sample was taken from a stain at the left side of the grip.
Okay, left side of the grip. Okay, we've already talked about those results. T2.
T2 was from a stain at the right side of the slide near the ejection port.
Okay, the ejection port meaning the place where bullets are put in to it.
I'm not exactly aware of that.
Okay. What were the results on that? Talk about the DNA results.
That was a mixture of two individuals. It was a single source profile that matched the profile of Genevive Dawes. And then there was additionally one additional genetic marker that was seen. And Virgilio Rosales was included as being a potential contributor to that one genetic marker. The statistic for Genevive Dawes was that same, less than 1 in 10 trillion. And the statistical weight for Virgilio Rosales was 1 in 10. So for every 10 individuals, one person's also going to be included.
So the one genetic marker that was left was a pretty common genetic marker.
That's correct.
Move to T3.
That was taken from trying to avoid any stained areas on the grip, the trigger, and the trigger guard and buttons.
Okay, so that's what we talked about, trying to avoid the stained areas. It's an attempt to get handler DNA rather than blood DNA.
Correct.
What are the results there?
The results of that was a mixture of two individuals. Genevive Dawes was included as being a potential contributor, and Virgilio Rosales was also included as being a potential contributor, and they both had the same statistical weight of the less than 1 in 10 trillion.
So in that, in attempting to get handler DNA, there was strong results for both Genevive Dawes and Virgilio Rosales.
From that sample taken, yes.
And they were taken from what areas?
It was taken of the grip, the trigger, and the trigger guard and buttons,
Trying to get away from all stained areas.
as best as was possible.
Okay, next part. Stain from the magazine, T1. What part of the magazine? Again, we're taking swabs of different areas of the magazine.
That was taken from the butt of the item.
Okay, the bottom,
Yes.
the part where if you're sliding it into a gun, your hand pushes it up into the gun.
Yes, that's what it appears to be.
Okay, tell me the results there.
That was a DNA profile that was obtained. That was a single female that matched the DNA profile of Genevive Dawes with that same statistical weight, 1 in 10 trillion. And Virgilio Rosales was excluded as being a potential contributor to that sample.
Stain number 2, T2 from the magazine.
That isn't clear exactly where she took that sample from. It was taken from a stain that was on one of the sides of the magazine.
And she drew a diagram of the stain of where it is.
Yes.
Basically in the middle of the magazine on one of the edges.
Yes, and that sample was, again, a single source profile that matched the DNA profile of Genevive Dawes with that same statistical weight of the less than 1 in 10 trillion.
And Virgilio Rosales
Was excluded.
T3, what was T3?
T3 of that sample was taken of the entire item, trying to avoid any stains, in hopes that there potentially could be handler DNA. That the result of that was that it was a mixture of 3 individuals. It was a major contributor, a minor contributor, and then there was 1 additional genetic marker. Genevive Dawes was included with a statistical weight of that less than 1 in 10 trillion. Virgilio Rosales also was included with that same statistical weight of the less than 1 in 10 trillion.
Okay, you're going to go to the next one, and it appears that 12.2.3 and 13.2.3 are both stained, oh, I'm sorry, I misread that. So T3 from the magazine is an attempt to get handler DNA, and T3 from the firearm are attempts to get handler DNA. Both are the T3s, correct?
That's correct.
And then there's a third T3 that's going to be the stain from the cartridge. What is the cartridge?
There were multiple cartridges that the serologist took samples from.
And those are just going to be the bullets that were removed from the gun? Submitted all together?
Yes.
Go ahead and tell me your results.
The result from that particular sample was a low-level single-source profile that Genevive Dawes was included as being a potential contributor. The most conservative statistic was 1 in 23. So for every 23 individuals, one person could have also contributed that DNA profile.
Showing you defense exhibits number 1, which will show how the Dallas Police Department. The magazine was removed from the gun, and here's how the magazine was. This we see at the top of the magazine. Is that what you guys would characterize at the lab as a cartridge?
Yes, I believe so.
Basically, it's a live round. Okay, so going back to stain, you've covered the first T3, the 13.2.3. We went over the statistical analysis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now we are on 13.5.1, which is a stain from an additional cartridge. What were the results?
That again was a low-level sample. It was a single source sample again. Genevive Dawes was included as being a potential contributor. The statistical weight for that inclusion was 1 in 756. And again, Virgilio Rosales was excluded.
And 13.6.1, the stain from another cartridge.
Again, it was a single source profile. Genevive Dawes was again included as being a potential contributor. The statistical weight for that inclusion was 1 in 862,000. So for every 862,000 individuals, you'd expect one person could also potentially be a contributor. And Virgilio Rosales was excluded.
And that is the extent of your DNA results for the items tested, correct?
That's correct.
Anything I left out?
There were samples that had been taken from various cartridges that did not obtain DNA profiles.
Anything else that this jury needs to know?
No?
Pass the witness.
Mr. Lewis?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Ferreria.
Good afternoon.
Just a few questions for you. Is it possible to transfer DNA from one object to another?
Yes, that's possible.
Okay. And with respect to that, you do not know, and you cannot testify to this jury how this particular evidence was either collected, bagged, or sent off to the lab.
That's correct. Prior to how it comes to the lab, I have no knowledge.
Say you have one piece of evidence that touches another that one has DNA and one does not have DNA, and they touch each other. Would it be possible for that object with the DNA to transfer DNA to the object that initially did not have DNA on it?
Yes, that would be possible.
Specifically blood.
Yes, that'd be possible.
So say we had an officer who had gloves on, who had blood all over her hands, and she handles the gun, she takes out the magazine, and there's blood in her hands. Is it possible to transfer the blood from her hands to either the gun or the magazine?
Yes, it would be possible if she had blood on her hands to transfer it to anything she touched.
Now, do you know anything about the facts of this case, either how the complainant died or where this gun was located, anything like that?
Personally, no.
Okay. So hypothetically speaking, if you got somebody who's been shot multiple times and they're bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds, and they get close to an object, would you expect that there may be blood on that object?
Yes, that's a possibility.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 65. believe it's the same photograph that the defense attorney showed you, but looking at this firearm, there appears to be blood all over this firearm.
Yes.
On the slide, on the top,
Yes.
on the trigger and the trigger guard, we've got blood droplets.
Yes, it appears that there's staining throughout.
Okay. On the butt of the gun, on the handle, the grips.
Yes.
Also looking at the magazine, there appears to be blood on the magazine,
Yes, there appears to be staining.
as well as blood droplets on the cartridges as well, sitting above the magazine.
Yes.
I'd ask you a question about whether or not the two objects touch. If one has DNA on it, the other one doesn't, and they touch, it's possible to transfer, correct?
Yes, that's possible.
And you're not aware of the facts in this case, but if I represent to you that the gun, and the magazine, and the cartridges were all contained in the same package, would it be possible for DNA from one of the objects to transfer to the other objects in the same bag?
Yes, that'd be possible.
Absolutely, sure.
Ms. Madsen?
No further questions. May this witness be released?
Mr. Lewis, any objections?
No objection, I'm sorry.
Very good. Thank you. You may stand down. Call your next witness, please.
Our next witness will be the serologist from Swiss. I'm sorry, the GSR.
Good afternoon. If you would please come to the front of the courtroom. And before you have a seat, excuse me, could you raise your right hand? Swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
Yes.
Please have a seat and be responding to questions from Ms. Madsen. That's also Mr. Lewis, who's in front of you. Ms. Madsen, this is your witness. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, will you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
My name is Nicole Palmer, Nicolepalmer, and I'm a trace evidence examiner.
And tell the jury what a trace analyst examiner does.
Essentially, we examine trace evidence that is found at crime scenes, so things like hairs, fibers, and gunshot residue.
Okay, and what is gunshot residue?
When a firearm is fired, the primer mixture inside of the ammunition is subjected to high temperature and pressure during an explosion that will propel the bullet out of the firearm. During that explosion, the primer mixture is vaporized and also expelled out of the barrel, along with any other gaps or openings within the firearm. That vaporous mixture will then condense into particles that are deposited on any nearby surfaces and remain on those surfaces until physically removed.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Showing you what's marked as Defense Exhibit 7. This is a gunshot residue kit that was admitted for record purposes with one of your colleagues. The IFS number will match the other forensic tests that have been done in this case, if you want to take a moment to verify.
Defense's Exhibit 27 is a copy of the report issued by my previous coworker.
And would this aid you in your testimony to the jury?
Yes, it will.
Defense offers Defense Exhibit number 27 into evidence.
Permission to ask a few questions, Judge, real quick.
Sure.
Ms. Palmer, this report was done by whom?
Miss Kara Crossway?
Okay, and have you had the opportunity to review this report?
I have, yes.
Did you verify any of the results that you came up with?
What do you mean verify? Technically?
Yes.
No, I did not.
Okay. So with regard to the information that's in this report, you'd be relying on the work that she did at that time, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know if there were any errors that were done in this particular test, can you?
I wouldn't know that.
Okay. I would object at this time. Lack of foundation.
Your Honor, may I take the witness on a few questions?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Ma'am, the person that did it is named Farrah Crossway, correct?
Correct.
And she's no longer employed there?
No, she is not.
Moved on to another job, correct?
Correct.
But do you have a system of peer review in order to maintain the integrity of your testing at SWIFTs?
We do. Another qualified analyst will technically review all of the data and any reports or supporting documentation for that specific case.
And basically, before any report will be sent out of your lab, somebody else verifies the results and signs off on the report, correct?
Correct. If the case is not successfully reviewed, then there will be no report issued.
So the fact that a report is even issued tells you that this has been peer reviewed, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any reason to doubt the veracity of this report?
No.
And is this a report made in your business, in the regular course of your business,
Correct.
at or near the time of the event,
Yes.
with a person with knowledge?
Yes.
And are these reports regularly kept in the regular course of your business?
Yes, they are.
We will resubmit Defense Exhibit 27.
Are you the custodian of records for this particular document?
The institute is, yes.
Okay. And were you part of the technical review process in this case?
No, I was not.
We was allowed the same objection, though.
All right, the objection's overruled. You may publish.
Ms. Palmer, let's go back talking about what gunshot residue is, okay? We've already covered it a little bit with the jury, but essentially if somebody's holding a gun and pulls the trigger, that gun is going to expel a cloud of certain materials, correct?
Correct. That would depend on the firearm and the ammunition
Right.
used, but yes.
Okay. We've already heard about contingencies, but it's fair to say that it expels a cloud, and some guns expel more and some guns expel less, correct?
Correct.
And some ammunition lets off a bigger powder puff, and some do less, correct?
Correct.
And if you want to find out any of the exact specifics of what was in that gun, you can have that specific gun tested, right?
We don't test firearms for the primer mixture components or anything like that.
I know you don't, but your lab does, and if you want results on that specific weapon, you have to do that. I'm making it clear that you don't have those results.
Oh, correct, yeah.
But merely what you do is you look for the presence of these materials on things.
We do, yes.
And it's going to be 3 materials, antimony, barium, and lead. Is that right?
Antimony, barium, and lead are the chemical elements that are present within the particles we're looking for.
And were you submitted items to check for the presence of gunshot residue?
The laboratory received those items, yes.
And the laboratory received those items and there was checks done, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to publish these, but I'll try to make it easy to read, but feel free to look at your report rather than the document can. I'm going to go through the evidence submitted, and so that we're not time consuming, why don't you look at your report and just tell me where you did find gunshot residue?
So the analyst who performed this test tested sample stubs, which are basically just flat aluminum push pins with sticky tape, and that sticky tape is dabbed against whatever surface is being collected from. So in this instance, it was both the hands of a person and clothing. So the analyst who did this collected sample stubs from item 15-1-1, which were green sweatpants from Genevive Dawes. 15-2-1, which was a gray t-shirt from Genevive Dawes. 18-1-1, which is a gray jacket from Ferreria Rosales. And 18-1-2, which was denim jeans from Ferreria Rosales. So that analyst would have collected those samples. And then the other samples that were tested were a sample stub from the back of the left hand and a back of the right hand, of Genevieve and Dawes that was received by the medical examiner's office.
And talking about the gunshot residue kit, basically the medical examiner, this jury has already met Dr. Gwen, but basically during the autopsy, he will take those push pins with tape on it and dab it on the person's hands. Put it in whatever you put it in to seal it, and then it can get submitted to you guys to look for gunshot residue.
Correct. The push pins are held in a plastic base, and then there's a plastic cap that will go over that push pin to protect the surface of the sample itself.
And only one push pin per container, correct?
Yes.
Where was gunshot residue found and how much?
Okay, so before I discuss that, I just want to discuss the differences in the types of gunshot residue. There are two types of gunshot residue: particles that are characteristic of gunshot residue and particles that are consistent with. The particles that are characteristic of were mentioned earlier, that have the three chemical elements barium, antimony, and lead, and those particles are rarely found from other sources other than firing a firearm. The other type are particles consistent with gunshot residue, and those particles have combinations of elements such as barium and aluminum, barium and lead, and barium and antimony. Those particles are considered to be consistent with gunshot residue because they can be produced by firing a firearm, but also by some environmental sources. So when I discuss the results, it'll be into terms of those two types. So, for the green sweatpants from Genevieve and Dawes, 2 or 3 particles characteristic of primer gunshot residue were confirmed on those sample stubs. 2 particles were found on the front upper left, and 1 particle was found on the front upper right. And these particles could be present on an individual's clothing due to the individual firing a firearm, being in proximity of the firearm that was fired, handling a firearm component, or any object with gunshot residue, or wiping a component that had gunshot residue on that item.
And we see in your report that you not you, I will quit saying you, the analyst listed all of those options, correct?
Correct.
It's not like you have a crystal ball and can say which it was.
No, they're all equally likely possibilities.
They're all equally, and the reason why there's a difference of handling a firearm and firing a firearm, I mean, basically, if a gun has ever been fired, there's a possibility that it leaves remnants on that gun, and if you touch that gun, you can get some of those particles on you.
Correct, unless the gun has been cleaned. Any physical removing of, say I had gunshot residue on my hands, any physical means can remove those particles, but in the same manner can transfer them to whatever's being used to remove them.
On the next side, it says being in the proximity of a firearm when it was fired. This cloud could be in the air when something was fired, correct?
Correct,
But it's just dust, isn't it?
essentially.
Okay. And there's no way to predict how far it's going to carry, but the dust could be stopped by, I'm going to use another term, interposing target. That's an interposing barrier.
An interposed target would be a target in between the firearm being fired and wherever the bullet ends up.
So if something's fired through glass before it strikes a person, that glass is going to be the interposed target and could stop any of that gunshot residue traveling through.
Correct, but there could be gunshot residue adhering to the bullet itself, which may not be affected by that.
Right. But the bullet traveling through it, interposed target, is something you consider.
Yeah, that's something to consider in the circumstances of where the gunshot residue would be deposited, yes.
And the last one is wiping a firearm component, or an object with primer gunshot residue on the garment.
Yes, so for instance, if I had gunshot residue on my hand and then I wiped it all over my shirt, that could transfer particles from my hand to my shirt.
Let's just move on to is there anything else you need to talk about for this? portion?
Not for that item. Do you want me to read the results for the next item?
Please.
One particle characteristic of primer gunshot residue was confirmed on the samples collected from the gray t-shirt of Genevieve and Dawes. And that particle was found on the front upper left of the item. And the reason for those particles being present are what we just discussed before.
Same reasons. No way to say which reason's more likely than the other.
No.
Do you have an opinion on what reason was more likely than the other?
No, there's no way for us to know that.
Move on to the next one.
Okay. 3 particles characteristic of primer gunshot residue were confirmed on the sample stubs collected from the gray jacket of Virgilio Rosales. 1 particle was found on the front upper right, 1 particle on the front lower left, and 1 particle on the left cuff.
Okay, just for my basic knowledge and the jury as well, are we talking when you say the front upper left, is this going to be the front upper left because it would be your left, or are you talking about which one?
So
Your
in
left
terms
one?
of collection of just a general t-shirt, we split it into quadrants, and then let's say this is my upper right quadrant, then the sampling would be through that whole quadrant for that one step. So 1 from each quadrant, and then for long sleeved items, 1 from each cuff as well.
So it's taken from the perspective of the items in front of you and you're looking at it, so this is left, not I'm wearing it and it's on my left.
No, I'm wearing it and it's on my left.
Okay, so upper left is on my left.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. So 3 particles were found. Did you go through where all 3 were found?
Yes, do you want me to repeat it?
Please.
1 particle was found on the front upper right, 1 particle was found on the front lower left, and 1 particle on the left cuff.
Anything else from this one you need to go through?
And no, the reasonings are the same as to how those particles could have been deposited.
Move on to your next one.
1 particle characteristic of primer gunshot residue was confirmed on the sample stubs collected from the denim jeans of Virgilio Rosales, and that particle was found on the front upper left of the jeans. And in this instance, with pants, we typically only collect from the front upper left and front upper right, meaning upper part of the thigh area, because that would be the most probative. So if there's other areas on clothing that they need tested, then that's something the detective would relay to us.
So the thigh area. Is that
Correct. It's sort of in the pocket area up towards the waistband and then down towards mid thighs.
Anything else from there?
The same reasoning as how they could be deposited.
The next one.
And 2 particles consistent with primer gunshot residue were confirmed on the sample stubs collected from the hands of Genevive Dawes. 1 particle was confirmed on the sample stub from the back of the left hand, and 1 particle confirmed from the back of the right hand. And these particles were barium aluminum particles, which can be produced by firing a firearm, but can also be produced by other environmental sources.
And is it the same reasons or?
Correct. If the particles were deposited from firing a firearm, which we cannot determine, then it would be the same deposition possibilities of how they got there.
And Ms. Palmer, there were multiple firearms at this scene. There's no way you could say, hey, this gunshot residue is from one over the other, right?
No.
And you're not going to be able to tell us which of those 4 reasons any of these particles got there.
No, there's no way for us to determine with this presence or absence test how the particles were deposited.
And you can't even say if there were more particles on any of these items. It's just the specific areas that got swabbed did show it.
Correct.
Possible that there were more, but you just don't know.
Correct, I wouldn't know that.
Pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Palmer. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I think talking about the transfer of gunshot residue, is it possible that if someone has recently fired a firearm who had, obviously they would have gunshot residue on their hands, if they were to touch another person who did not initially have the gunshot residue on them, is it possible to transfer the gunshot residue from one person to another?
Yes.
Right. And you also testified that gunshot residue can attach to a bullet as well, is that right?
The bullet is within the barrel when the whole explosion is happening, so it will be caught contacted by that primer mixture and all of the vapor being produced within the firearm.
Okay, so can a bullet transfer gunshot residue to a person if they're hit by a bullet?
It could, yeah.
Okay. So we talked about person-to-person transfer. Is it also possible to transfer gunshot residue from one object to another, say from shirt to pants, if they were to touch?
Yes, that's possible as well.
And you talked about, with regard to the gunshot residue that was found on the clothing, that was all characteristic, right?
Correct. Those were the particles that I discussed that had the 3 chemical elements of lead, barium, and antimony.
However, the particles that were found on the hand, specifically of Genevive Dawes, was consistent, is that right?
Correct, yes. Barium aluminum particles.
You said that could be, from being close to either firing a firearm, being close to a firearm, or from a firearm component, is that right?
Correct, or from handling any object that had firearm, or had any firearm or firearm component or object that had primer gunshot residue on it.
Okay, but you also stated that it could be from other environmental sources, is that right?
Yes.
What does that mean? Can you give us an example of that?
For that specific type of particle, barium aluminum, they are also found in deployed car airbags and fireworks.
Okay. And with regard to the different numbers of particles that we see, is there a difference? Like, what's the maximum number of particles is there a limit on that?
Per our laboratory procedure, we would confirm up to 5 on each sample stub. So for instance, when I discussed the shirt, there would be 4. We would confirm up to 5 on each 4. So if there was less, then we would confirm anything that's found. For instance, if there was 1, we would confirm that 1.
Are you able to gather anything from the different amounts? Say that you have something that has 4 particles on it and another has 1. What does that tell you, if anything?
There's no way to make any determination about what that would mean, because there's no way to know how much gunshot residue was initially deposited or whether those particles were transferred or how they got there. So there would be no way to know whether you would expect more or less than was found.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop.
No further questions.
May this witness be finally excused.
No objection, ma'am.
Very good. Ma'am, you may stand down. You're excused from any further service in this matter. Call your next witness, please.
This time defense will call Officer Wilco.
If you would please come to the front of the courtroom. Before you have a seat, could you please face me and raise your right hand? I swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
Yes, sir, I do.
Please have a seat. You responded to questions from Mr. Harris, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps also Mr. Lewis. Very good. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. How are you, Officer Wilcox?
I'm doing good, sir.
Okay, could you please state your name just for the court?
Robert Wilcox.
And where do you work?
Excuse me, City of Dallas, Dallas Police Department.
And how long have you worked for the Dallas Police Department?
I'm about 19 and a half years now.
Okay, are you a certified peace officer working for the City of Dallas?
Yes, sir, I am.
Could you tell the jury just a little bit about your background with Dallas Police Department?
I've been on the department since 2000. Went through the Dallas Police Department Basic Academy. Since then, I've had some additional training, my recertification training every 2 years to stay certified with my license. I'm a TCOL instructor with the state of Texas and with the Dallas Police Department. I also, with that, I teach officers new classes and stuff throughout the city. I'm also was in a specialized unit, the DWI squad, in the traffic unit. I'm currently assigned in patrol now, which goes out and answers 911 calls and works accidents and different things like that.
All right, as a patrol officer, what section of the city are you working currently?
Currently, I work in the Northwest subdivision, which is basically everything from the tollway all the way over to Irving, all the way from 30 to 635.
Okay. And were you working for the Dallas Police Department on January 18th of 2017?
Yes, sir, I was.
And could you tell the jury, do you remember what hours you were working that day?
I worked 11 to 7.
Okay. And so I want to take your attention to I guess you'd be getting close to ending your shift that day, so the early morning hours that day. I guess were you called out to an officer shooting?
Yes, sir, I was.
And could you tell the jury or describe to the jury how you got called out to that location?
I was working regular patrol with my partner at the time, and there was a shots fired officer assist that came out, and I was working in the Central Business District, which is basically all the downtown area where all the big buildings and stuff are at. This was just slightly outside, but being on Channel 1, which is the Central Division, we would go cover if there was a priority 1 call, which was an officer assist as a priority 1 call. So we got dispatched, and we weren't too far off, so we went out to the call to assist in whichever way we could.
And could you tell the jury, do you remember the exact location that you went to?
I'm going to be honest, I don't know the exact location. I mean, I'd have to look at the report, but I don't know the exact location off the top of my head.
Okay, if I said the 5 Trees apartment, would that sound familiar or refresh your memory?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you describe for the jury, I mean, when you got there, what did the scene look like?
From the best of my memory, basically when I arrived at the scene, we pulled up outside of the apartment complex. It was a very narrow, I want to say alleyway, whatever, to be able to enter into the apartment complex to the back. In the back there was a couple squad cars, and then there was other cars parked, and then at that point is when I came in contact with Hess and the other officers that were out there at the time. It was a little chaotic at the time when I got there because things were still, I want to say 100% live in action, but they were still, we hadn't secured the scene yet. We were still trying to figure out what was going on and calm down everything at that point.
Okay, so fair to say when you got there, pretty chaotic scene, correct?
Yes, it was. It was yeah, chaotic. Still trying to figure out what was going on.
Okay, and did you originally arrive to be a cover officer?
Yes, I did. I was there to help out whatever was needed.
Okay, and let me ask you this: when you were out there, do you remember? Were you wearing a body cam?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay, and did you activate your body cam once you got there?
I believe it was activated. Yes, sir.
Okay, do you know, after all of this, if your body cam was ever seized, or if your body cam was ever turned over to either investigators or to the DA's office?
I do know that our body camera team came out, and they did take possession of my body camera to download all the video off of it.
Okay, and so when you get there, you said that you originally saw Officer Hess, correct?
Officer Hess and the other officers that were out there, yes, sir.
And the other officers. Do you remember exactly what they were doing when you got there?
I'm gonna be honest, it was crazy. So everybody was just sort of running around. I don't want to say, I guess, sort of trying to figure out what exactly happened at the point, because we were there shortly. I don't know exactly how quick, but we weren't there too far long after it was put out that the shots fired.
Okay, so let me ask you this: when you got there, were there suspects from the vehicle that had been shot? Were they still there at the scene?
Yes, sir. We had actually, I believe, beat the ambulance there. The ambulance pulled up shortly after we did. Okay. One of them was the complainant or the deceased was still in the vehicle, and then the other suspect was laying on the ground in handcuffs, the gentleman that was with her.
Okay, and did it appear that officers were still trying to assess whether there were continued danger in place, security of the scene and things like that as they were performing their duties?
I think, yes, I think at that point we were still trying to make sure that we didn't have people coming in and out and going, and we had the scene as secure as we could until we got enough officers there to settle everything down and then start doing the next level of process that we needed to do.
Okay. And the best of your recollection, your body cam would have picked up all of that, correct?
Yes, it would have picked up whatever would have been in the view of my camera at the time.
Okay. At some point, I mean, were you there long enough for things to kind of settle down to where the scene got secure?
Yes, sir. I was pretty much from that point on. I was there almost until the end of it.
Okay, and once the scene was somewhat secure, at least to know that we have enough cover officers, we've got a suspect detained, we've got ambulances on the way. At any point in time, did you have any conversations or ask the group of officers any questions?
Yeah, I was sort of trying to take charge of, because I was pretty much the most senior officer out there at the time. So I was trying to take charge and figure out what we had and find out who was involved in the actual shooting, who was just sort of a witness, and trying to, once we got everything, getting people isolated, getting everybody so that when the SIU detectives got out there, they could, they would know exactly who, what, and when, and all that.
Let me interrupt you for a second there. So, at the point that you, well, let me go back a second. When you get there, you understand there's an officer involved shooting, correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. After the scene settles, is it your intent or desire to start separating the officers so that they're away from each other and maybe have an officer that's with them?
Yeah, what usually the way it works is when there's an officer involved shooting, we find out who it is. We separate the officers, put them in different squad cars. We assist.
Let me just interrupt you.
Okay.
I just want to stick to this question, okay?
Okay.
So did you separate the officers in this situation?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And I just want to get to the point, okay? In that situation, did you have contact with Officer Hess when you separated the officers?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And I'm not asking about anything that was said or anything like that, but would you say that you were the officer that was, I guess, assigned to him to be with him at that point in time? Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I was the companion officer is what we call it at the time.
And did you get to observe Officer Hess for quite a while during that time period?
Yes, I was in the squad car with him for, I can't give you an exact amount of time, but for a good amount of time.
Okay. And fair to say, you didn't talk to him about the specifics of what happened. Is that fair to say?
No, sir. I just made sure he was okay, made sure he didn't need any medical attention, and tried to comfort him. When I say comfort, try to get him as whatever he would need for that situation.
And let me ask you this. The time that you were with Officer Hess, fair to say it was pretty recent or pretty soon after this shooting that he had been involved in, correct?
I would say within 10 minutes of the shooting. Yes, sir.
So you were able to observe him, correct?
Yes, sir, I was.
And how would you describe, how visually would you describe Officer Hess in that time period right after that happened?
I think when I wrote my statement, I wrote he was shaken up. When I say shaken up, I'm not like, he just, you could tell that it was bothering him, that it was, that.
I object to speculation as to what was in his mind. He can describe his physical appearance, but as pertains to what he may have been thinking, I would object to that.
All right. As long as you stay with the physical appearance, sir, you're okay to answer the question. You may continue.
You could tell that it was, he was shooken up. He was not his normal calm person that he normally is, because I've known him for a while, worked with him, and he was a whole different person. I don't want to say like a nutcase, but he was just shooken up, and it was bothering him.
Did he seem that Was there any indication that he seemed happy about firing shots that night or early morning hours?
I would say probably the last from being happy. It was more sorrow. I say sorrow.
Check the speculation once again, Mike.
Overruled. Go ahead.
I would say more. I don't know how to describe it. It's more. You could tell it took a toll on him. It was taking a toll on him. It wasn't, oh yeah, I did another one, or I did this, or I shot somebody, or so. It was, hey,
Let me ask you this. Was there any appearance to you that this seemed to be a planned incident in looking at him?
Oh no.
Speculation.
Yeah, the objection's sustained. Well, how that would appear.
Did Officer Hess appear emotional after this happened?
Crying. I wouldn't say he was crying, but emotionally disturbed. Yes.
Stressed and stressful?
Yeah, stress, emotional stress like that. But like crying, I wouldn't say he was crying that I recall. But you could tell it was bothering him pretty hard.
And you said that you had worn a body camera that night, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you said that had been seized, correct?
Yes, sir, it was.
Judge, we'd just like to put on the record that we've not received a body camera from officer.
Okay, that's a sidebar comment. If y'all need to approach later, you certainly can.
I'll pass this witness, Your Honor.
Just a few questions. Officer Wilcox, you stated that the defendant was shaken up. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any conversations about the shooting? Is that correct?
No, sir, we did not.
With the defendant. So you can't tell this jury what was in his mind at that point. Is that right?
No, sir, I could not.
Okay. So you can't say whether or not he was sorrowful. You can't say whether or not he felt guilty for shooting somebody and it was unjustified. You can't say that, can you?
We're not allowed to talk to him, so no, I couldn't.
Your Honor, I'm just going to object. That's an argumentative question.
Sustained.
No further questions.
May this witness be finally excused for the time being.
No objection.
No objection for the defense.
Very good. Sir, you may stand down, but please don't go far. I may have some more questions for you. Members of the jury, we're going to take a break at this time. If you would please go with the sheriff. No research and no discussions among yourselves. All rise for the jurors. And then we'll take a break. Okay? $15 minutes, Sheriff. Y'all may be seated. Mr. Harris, you had, y'all may be seated, it's okay. Made mention about something that you hadn't received. I felt that it wasn't appropriate to discuss it in front of the jury. It certainly is appropriate now that we're outside the presence. Tell me what's happening.
Judge, and I apologize for raising that in front of the jury, but
right.
Officer Wilcox has indicated that he was wearing a body-worn camera, that he had also, I believe, written that in his statement that he gave right after this happened. He's indicated...
I'm sorry, Mr. Harris, you say he wrote that. You're talking about...
That he was wearing a body camera.
He wrote that in the statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
And that it was seized and taken by the police, and at no point through this discovery process has the defense received any kind of video from Officer Wilcox.
Sir Lewis?
Officer Wilcox produced.
Judge, the state is not in possession of Officer Wilcox's body cam video. Met with Detective Richardson, went through his entire file, copied his entire file, and the defense. So at this time, the state is not in possession, and Detective Richardson is not in possession of that video.
Do we know what happened in the video, or was there any accounting for this video?
I'm not sure. We can ask Detective Richardson, but as far as I can't give them anything I don't have.
Do you have this statement that you're talking about?
Yes, Your Honor. I have a copy of it if you want to see it.
I don't need to see it. I mean, I trust you. What I'm saying is, when was that statement written?
Let me look
I mean, back contemporaneously with the offense, the initial investigation,
I've got
2000?
it right now, Your Honor, and it looks like it's a written statement that subscribed and sworn off on January 18th of 2017, which I believe is the same day of this offense.
And as it relates to that specific comment about the body cam, can you tell me what it says?
Yes, Your Honor. At the end of his statement, it says, "I then responded to police headquarters to give this statement. At no time did I fire my weapon, and I was wearing a body camera. Sergeant Williams took my body camera, as well as Officer Hess's at the scene."
All right, very good. We're going to take, at this break, you all can inquire about the existence or not of this body cam footage. I'll take it up at a later time.
And Your Honor, during the testimony, I was handed a document that is youth immunity document
Okay.
for Wilco Rosales. I've checked my inventories and at no time have I previously been given this. I only have one copy that I was tendered during defense. However,
I'm sorry, wait, what do you mean?
that I was tendered during testimony.
That copy you have in your hand?
Yes. However, it is a document giving use immunity to Wilco Rosales. It does have a number of discrepancies in it. It does not have this case number on it, and it is filed for some reason in Criminal District Court number 7. So it would not have been in any of the case files for Mr. Rosales had I ordered certified records, which I did. And at no point have I been tendered this prior to trial.
That approach, Your Honor, I'll give you a copy.
Sure.
With regard to the case number and the court that it's in, that would have been prior to the grand jury, prior to the indictment. And so that would have, the numbers that are on there are public integrity numbers that are assigned as the cases come in to the DA's office. And that particular district court would have been for the court that was presiding over the grand jury at that time. Now, with regard to providing this in discovery, I take responsibility for that. It was an oversight on my part. But I will say that there is a reference to that in the grand jury testimony. Specifically, volume 2 of the transcript on page 6. And I'll just quote from it. The prosecutor handling the case at that time was ADA Jason Hermes.
Can you speak up?
I'm sorry. Prosecutor handling that case was ADA Jason Hermes. When he's talking to the witness, Wilco Rosales, he states that your testimony is being compelled. Do you understand that I have asked a judge to compel your testimony on my grant of immunity to you? You are going to receive what's called use immunity, which means nothing that you can say today can be used against you. Do you understand this? And the response was, yes, sir. So, again, I take responsibility that it was not turned over, but as it goes to the intent, it was an oversight and there was no intent there to hide this from the defense, especially to the fact that we did turn this transcript over to the defense, and so they were aware that there was immunity granted to this witness.
When did you turn over this testimony from the grand jury that you're referring to? And as close to an approximate day, if you don't have a precise day.
Yes, sir. I can give you that. Just give me one moment, please.
And
I have the precise date, Your Honor. It would be April 17th, 2019. I have the inventory that lists the grand jury transcripts.
is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you? And that was April of 2019.
19.
Okay. All right, Ms. Mattson.
The date of the use immunity is signed on June 21st of 2017.
I noticed that I signed that. I had forgotten. Tell me what you're asking me to do, if anything, at this point about that.
Your Honor, the use immunity document is clearly exculpatory and mitigating evidence that we should have been given during the pretrial discovery. It's not something that we should be expected to find on our own, especially with the number it has and the cause number, and that it's in the wrong court, and the fact that it refers to Rosales as a female. I understand that this is something that would be in the state's possession and the state's possession wholly. I don't see that it was even filed anywhere. It would be only in their possession, and the only way I would get it is from them. They did not turn it over, and then Mr. Lewis stood up in opening arguments and stated there was no way to know what was going on in that car. That creates a false impression with the jury. They have already compelled somebody to testify to the grand jury. It states they are compelling him to testify to the grand jury to find out what is going on in that car. It is false for him. It creates a false impression that there's no way to know. There was a way to know. They explored that way. They evaluated that way. And when they deemed at trial as a trial strategy to not call him, they continued with their questions to create a false impression.
So, okay, I mean, I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but what are you asking me to do with this information?
I believe that they have made what Virgilio Rosales says happened that night extremely relevant, and they have intentionally created a false impression that there was no way to know what he said and there was no information out there. The appropriate remedy that I'm asking for is to allow me to admit evidence from Melissa Burke of what he has told her. I don't know I didn't prior to trial know what kind of immunity was given to him. I didn't know what it covered. I didn't even know where the document was or where to find it. I would submit to the court that his trial strategy has made it extremely important that in order to right the wrong, the false impression he has intentionally given this jury, makes the statement made to Melissa Burke admissible. I would state to the court that statements that would usually be inadmissible, like you've ruled that statement because of hearsay, with Brady violations and intentional misperceptions and false impressions laid to the jury, then become admissible. It's what is fair.
Okay. We're going to be in recess for 10 minutes.
Your Honor, may I make a brief record on all of the questions that he has asked with the various witnesses that have cast the two parties as acting as one?
Sure.
The state has asked on direct with Officer Evans, they were sleeping 2 or 3 times, saying they as in the passenger and the driver. With Officer Lickward, did you know anything about the people in the car? They were wrapped in a blanket consisting with them sleeping. How do you know they weren't aware that y'all were police? If they wanted to strike the officer, they could have. Wasn't the vehicle moving too slowly to strike or hurt anyone? If they had wanted to run over the police officers, they would have done it, wouldn't they? Didn't they intentionally maneuver the vehicle to avoid the squad car? They could have floored it and rammed the squad car. Weren't they sleeping? Knowing their motives or mindset would be just speculation, right? You didn't know either of the people in the car. On redirect with Hopkins, you played the horn and the siren because they were asleep. If the driver had wanted to ram the squad car, she could have stomped on the gas. They could have rammed with Mr. Samples, Joe Samples, the civilian witness, they could have rammed the squad car again if they were intent on hurting the officers. Did it appear to you like she was going to strike or ram the officers, or did it just appear she was trying to get out of there? Did it appear that she was trying to hit anybody? She didn't know those officers were back there. In these characterizations, they describe the two parties, both the driver and the passenger, as a they, as in parties in the same criminal episode, that they were acting in conjunction with each other, and that what they were doing was together.
Okay.
Judge, may I add to that? I would also show the court in response to the question that you asked about the grand jury testimony. The grand jury testimony indicates that the district attorney's office called an Ernest Embry at the stage of the grand jury. Ernest Embry is a Dallas Sheriff's Department employee that they called and employed to go out and take measurements and do speed estimates. They called that individual before the grand jury, heaped profuse praise on him, thanked him out the wazoo for previous jobs that he's done on their behalf and helping them out. They asked him the specific questions concerning the mindset of the two individuals in there, and specifically speed and the intent of the parties in the vehicle has been made a focal point of this case. I would like to read you two of the questions that were asked him.
From the grand jury?
From the grand jury testimony.
Okay.
This is by Jason Hermes talking to Mr. Embry. And I've got to tell you, I really appreciate all the times that DSO has helped us out in our investigations. We appreciate and trust y'all's work product. And their grand juror is talking to the witness about the vehicle and what it can and can't do. Grand juror, and you have a 2,000-pound car hitting someone at 6 miles an hour could cause grievous injuries. The witness, yes, it could, yes.
Your Honor, I do believe that he's making a record on some of the other evidence that was offered. In terms of what is offered in regards to the actors of the car that night.
And not only that,
okay,
but they called
you're
two witnesses yesterday on this. Let me read one more point, and then I'll leave this alone. But I'm just asking you generalities. Is that the kind of speed? Let me just put it like this. Is the kind of speeds that this vehicle is exhibiting going to be typically the kind that would alarm an officer, just generally speaking? Answer by Mr. Embry. Their witness, their expert. Yeah, no, sure, I mean, yeah. I would say that it's alarming. Question, okay, in what way? I mean, it's presenting a danger. You know that. I mean, you don't want to get hit by a car, whether it's going, 40 miles an hour or 5 or 6. But I mean, if it were me, yeah, it would be an alarming yes. This is what they have focused on. This is what they've got experts on. This is the gravamen of their defense to Officer Hess's actions, and it couldn't be any more material, relevant, and going to the heart of the fact situation that we're saying existed in the mind of Officer Hess at the point in time he decides he's got an officer at risk. And for the court to keep that out deprives us of effective assistance of counsel and facts that are, in this case, could only be in the mind of an individual that we submit to the court is a party to an additional offense, assault on these officers, and for that reason, among others, that they've tried to create a false impression that it doesn't exist, and we're shocked by it. It's a fact. They were trying to run over the officers, and there could not be more relevant or material information that has come out in 3 days than that fact. And they're the ones that brought it forward. They had experts on it. They have experts on it to this day. And for those reasons, it ought to be admissible.
Okay. We're taking a 10-minute break.